Hey,
Hello.
you and me.
Am I the first one?
Yeah. At least I know I'm in the right place.
I know, right? Happens to me all the time.
Yeah. How you be?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I went and got a milkshake.
Nice. From where?
I went to Sonic, which is everywhere in
Yeah,
Tennessee.
yeah,
I
yeah.
had to drive 20 minutes to get to a really good one, though. I think I need to get more acquainted with Culver's. I need
Milkshake.
to adapt.
That sounds good. Hi, Karen. Oh, can't hear you yet. And that's Linda. And here comes Rudy.
Hello.
Hey, hey. Hey, Rudy. What's the word, everybody? Word on the street. Well,
It's cold out there.
yeah, I took a walk before class. All right. Rolling in on a Tuesday night. Autumn had a milkshake. That's all the news that's fit to print. Hi, John. How are you, brother?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to see you, man.
Yeah, same here.
Let's give it a few minutes. Paul Wagman. I thought it was Paul Hershkowitz when it said Paul. I like all Pauls. I'm for the Pauls. I can't hear you, Paul. You're on mute. It's all. I bet what you're saying is really awesomely interesting and witty and urbane. That's a word you don't hear all the time.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
I said, I like our Randy's, and I was just watching the newest Randy Rainbow on Jack Wally. Have you seen that?
I heard about it. I actually, I referenced Rainbow, whatever is it, Randy Rainbow.
Randy Rainbow.
A sermon a couple years ago, because my kids told me, they were all like, "Oh, I know why," because I was going to. But my sermon was centered around rainbow. The metaphor was the rainbow. And I said, when I told my kids about it, they said, "Please don't, because everyone's going to call you Randy Rainbow." And I said, but I did hear about that. I did hear about that video. All right, there's Renee. Hi, Marion Rosen. And Guan.
Favor them, but this is hilarious. It's
Hello,
really
Rabbi Randy.
Hey, Guan. This is a great group. We can solve all the problems of the world with just this group. I can feel it. And Marion's cat that just strolled by. All right, what is it? 7:03. Let's give it to 7:05, and then I'll start. How's that?
Sounds good.
Cool. Anyone have anything they want to upload? I don't mean like on the. I mean like, do you anyone? I was using that like as anyone have anything they want to say. That's what I meant. Upload.
I'm in Henderson, that I'm in North Carolina.
You are? What are you doing there?
Visiting my parents.
What are they doing there?
They're taking it easy.
Where in North Carolina, Rudy?
I'm Hendersonville.
Okay.
And today there was a long line of guests.
It looks beautiful where you are.
Yeah, I'm in the backyard. And we went to Saluda. We went to DuPont. We went, yeah, it was nice.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. I like North Carolina too. Right before COVID, I did a wedding in
Oh, okay.
Actually, you know who it was? I officiated the wedding. Who remembers Virginia Horwitz, who was our director of yeah. I officiated her daughter's wedding in Asheville, North Carolina.
Which daughter?
Anna.
Anna?
Yeah. All right, guys, I think we're good. We got a great group here. I have a class to teach. We kind of the theme this month for May, this is the second university series of May, was sort of an interesting theme, which is the classes themselves don't create a theme, but the style of teaching. And we decided we would try to do some Beit Midrash Chavruta style classes, meaning the 4 classes for May, we're going to do more small group kind of discussion / learning / enlightenment than we normally do, I guess, on these Zoom University Series classes. But we have the technology to do it. I've just, thanks to Autumn, I think I know how to put people into small groups. So periodically, we'll be together in this big group, and then I'll give you guys some texts to read and absorb. And then let's see, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, like 14. So maybe like, I don't know, groups of, someone do the math, the groups of 3 or something like that. Who's got a better mind on the, what should I do?
How many groups do you want to have?
I don't know. No, like 2s. We'll do 2s. That's perfect. It'll be chavruta.
Yeah.
Classic chavruta are pairs. Is everybody okay with that? So you'll pair up, and I think each time you pair up, it'll be like a little bit of a different pairing because it's random. So that'll be good. So you'll have a chance to spend time with a person each time. So that's kind of the theme is the style. So I'm going to introduce this class in just a moment. I do want to just spend a real quick second. I don't have much to say about it right now. I'm still kind of integrating everything that's happening, but I certainly am offering my prayers to all the people in Israel and Palestine and Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem. And unfortunately, we're in a period of, again,
Tel Aviv.
Yep, of high turbulence and of violence and of a seeming, at least for now, downward spiral, which none of us want. So I'm sending out prayers and good vibes and hope for something better to emerge. So for shalom and for salam, for peace, thought we would at least mention that tonight. Amen. Okay, so I kind of do want to like hear everybody say hello and just say your name, and it's kind of nice. I know everybody actually on the screen. I'm not sure if everybody knows everybody. So why don't we do that really quick? Maybe just I'll say your name and maybe a brief something you want to share about how about your something a highlight of your day, a brief highlight of your day. How about that? So I'll call you out. I've got Linda. Go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a highlight.
Okay, I guess my highlight would be I just made a plane reservation to go visit my grandchildren and one of my children in June. So that is really a highlight. Awesome.
And you're Linda. You should say your name,
Yes.
even though I'm going to say your name.
Oh, yes, I'm Linda. Last name is Green, like the color.
Thank you. How many times do you say that a day?
Many, many, many. It keeps anyone from saying, is there an E at the end?
Gotcha. Okay. And I got Karen next. Oh,
There we go. I'm Karen, and the highlight of my day was driving with my 15-year-old son.
Well, that's good.
Actually him driving.
Him driving, yes, him actually driving. He has his learner's permit. So
I love it. I love it. Autumn.
She's on.
Hey, everybody. I'm Autumn. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. And highlight of my day was, I already told Randy this, but I got a milkshake right before class and it was amazing, you guys.
Oh, you have to tell us what flavor.
It was a Reese's Sonic Blast.
Oh, Sonic.
Oh,
That's
So it's
great.
basically ice cream, but it was amazing.
That's nice. All right, Rudy, go for it.
My highlight is visiting my parent in North Carolina and also having a fun trip so far.
That's great. Thank you, buddy. It's good to see you.
And sitting near a waterfall right now.
All right, now you're really gonna make it. The waterfall's more enticing to me than the milkshake. But Ezra, you're up.
Well, you're here in back of me, okay?
All right, hold on. Next one, Ezra.
Hi, my name is Ezra. Pronouns are they, them. Just moved to St. Louis. Highlight of the day is probably making a spreadsheet to scale recipes.
Okay,
Spreadsheet
Okay.
for what?
for recipes. Yeah, gotta love those spreadsheets. John.
Hi, everybody. My name is John. Highlight of my day, I guess, really was being back in the classroom at Ladue High School. And after the class was out, picking my new puppy up at daycare.
oh,
Nice.
After 20 plus years, I'm back to training a dog, and it's wearing
you.
me out.
That's great. Good for you. Good luck with that. What's the dog's name?
Izzy,
Oh, I like that.
Izzy, after Isabella.
I got it. Paul.
My name is Paul Wagman, and the highlight of my day was getting into an argument with my wife, which ended up with us both laughing hilariously.
That always is good.
But
Thank you, Paul. All right. And we got a twofer, 2 in 1 box. Lisa Stan.
I'm Lisa, and highlight of my day was Stan coming over for dinner.
You stole my job.
And then he stayed.
Anyway, I had 2 highlights. One was visiting the garden yesterday, so it's a little bit of a cheat. And today, just seeing everybody is
He's talking about visiting the CRC garden
Yes.
yesterday.
I knew.
You knew, but not everybody else.
Oh, thank you. That's true. Thanks, you guys. Thomas.
Hey, I'm Thomas, and this is also a cheat, but this is I'm feeling this is a highlight right now, being in this class.
Awesome. There you go. That's good. It's good to be with you too. Renee.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas, because I was getting all ready to pander. And you scooped me, so now I'm gonna have to come up with something else. Actually, the highlight of my day, I went out to a tile showroom and picked out tiles for changes I'm gonna make to my bathroom.
Ooh.
Colorful tiles, yeah. I'm taking out the tub and making it into a walk-in shower.
Uh-huh.
Sounds awesome. All right. Marion and her cat.
Our highlight is that Henry, who was a witness at our wedding, not to Abra here, but to my husband, Jonathan, is a house guest, and we're not wearing masks. He's up from Louisiana.
Love that.
And it just feels normal and right.
Love it. Yeah, we're getting there. I really feel it. We had I had my confirmation class outside of CRC, like actually in person. We've been on Zoom all year pretty much, and it was really, really nice. And little Lag BaOmer a few weeks ago. So we're getting there. Juan.
Well, good evening, everyone. Kind of a low-key day. The most accomplished thing I did today was finally schedule a dentist appointment that I've been going back and forth trying to make happen for a couple of weeks. And I found some cherries at the supermarket this morning, so that made me happy.
All right.
But other than that, kind of low-key.
Well, I like that making the dentist appointments the highlight of your day. It'll be interesting to see if actually going to the dentist will be the highlight of that day. Maybe.
Oh, probably not.
Maybe. And Philip, you there, buddy? Philip might not be there, but it's a good picture.
It's a great picture.
Yeah,
Very.
I'm there. I'm there. I can say hello real fast. I'm on with technical support on another phone. Philip Deitch, he, him, his. Highlight was I had 2 different board meetings today, and I did not walk away being hit with more projects to have to do myself. So that's a good thing.
You're learning after all these years. That's great. Thank you, everybody. Let's see, Randy and I just took a nice long walk before class started, so I'm all invigorated and I'm ready to roll. So I thought it was a good opportunity, this sort of Chavruta style. I've long been intrigued by these 2 platforms that I kind of, some of you saw like what the topic was going to be. The reform movement of Judaism, of which I am a part, and CRC is a member of the larger reform, the Organization of Reform Congregations. I didn't grow up Reform. I think many people know I grew up in the humanistic movement, but that might be another class for another day. But I am a Reform rabbi, and there's much about the Reform movement that I really do gravitate towards religiously. But there are these 2 statements, and they're over 100 years apart. And they tell a really, to me, interesting dynamic story of a religious movement. The first one was written in 1885, and it's almost inconceivable, but in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the second one was also in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not coincidentally. Well, I'll let you know more about that in a second. In 1999, so right at the turn of the century, right before Y2K, if you all remember that delightful phrase. So I want to back up and give a little bit of context to the lead up or some of the history behind the writing of both platforms before we actually delve into the platforms themselves. But that's what we're going to be talking about in our Beit Midrash Chavruta, is I'm going to throw out there texts from both, so you can kind of compare and contrast, both in your duos and also in the big group. But let me sort of give a little bit of historical context. And I know some of you know this history, and but I feel like it's important before we like read these texts to sort of get a little bit of where they're coming from. And this is going to be a kind of a thumbnail, sort of very brief kind of gloss, but I hope helpful. If you have a question or you want to say something, I really am, I always have a plan, but I'm always ready to kind of let us go on tangents if it feels like those, if that's where the group is going. So just raise your hand, either your actual hand or there's that little hand feature on Zoom. Questions or comments are certainly welcomes. But the prehistory of Reform Judaism is that there was Judaism, right? We're kind of talking pre-modern, pre-emancipation, pre-enlightenment, and especially in Europe, the way you belonged was you belonged to your religious community. There really wasn't a way you couldn't before emancipation, you couldn't be a citizen of a nation state, right? You had to, your belonging was to that religious community. And in the Jewish world, that meant that if you were Jewish, obviously on a spectrum of observance, you always had people on each point in the spectrum, but basically everybody was assumed to be observant of Jewish law. And in fact, Jewish law, if you were a Jew, was your law. There wasn't really civil law, right? Obviously there were, Jews being a persecuted minority were subject to all kinds of horrible persecutions and violence. But in the context of their own community, Jewish law was law. And I always tell wedding couples when I officiate weddings that, you know, when we sign a ketubah nowadays at a Jewish wedding, it's entirely standing when a couple signs a ketubah. I call it a spiritual marriage license, ketubah. That's kind of the way I phrase it. But in pre-modern days, ketubah was the marriage, you know, what we consider now, you know, a couple, whatever religion they are or no religion, they're licensed as a married couple through their municipality and then state and nation. But back in pre-modern days, the ketubah had the force of the marriage license that people get in St. Louis and St. Louis County these days, right? So you had pre-modern and modern. What changed with emancipation was that now individuals could be citizens regardless of their religious community or their religious tradition, which really meant that a person, and this was like, unprecedented, basically, a person could be no religion at all. So a Jewish person, for example, could kind of opt out. It probably wasn't easy in the 18th century, but they could legally do it and claim no belonging to any religious community and still have standing as a citizen, right? So in the very early days of emancipation, Jews had a choice. They had basically two choices: to be traditionally Jewish or to step away from being any religion at all, including Jewish, right? And that was sort of the beginning of this modern era. Well, into that sort of atmosphere comes a group of people in Germany in the early 19th century who called themselves reformers, right? And they proposed basically a third way. I feel like I'm using sort of contemporary terminology. I'm sure they didn't use that phrase, but it came to my mind. They proposed a third way, which was they didn't want to be Jewish in the way that that Jews had for centuries in terms of totally observant of all Jewish law, right? And following the traditions as they've kind of largely stayed in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. But they also wanted to still be Jewish and to still be part of Jewish community. And therefore they began a reform movement in Germany, which then spread to other places in Europe, which instituted reforms. What were some of the reforms? Does anyone want to throw out what you know or what you think might have been some of the early reforms of the reform movement? We're talking, again, the early 1800s, right? The early 19th century, even before the Civil War in the United States. So this is, going back quite a ways. What do you think were some of the reforms of the reform movement, intuitively or what you know through knowledge? Anybody?
I think kosher laws.
Oh, okay, so I would even go further than that. I would say pretty much all of oral Torah was called into question. Very early on, the reformers were not very enamored of Talmud and Mishnah. They thought that Talmud was was archaic. They thought it was filled with superstition. Jews, and I'm purposely not using the word Orthodox, because the word Orthodox didn't come into play until after there was Reform. Does that make sense? In other words, there was Jews, right? Like we were talking about. Once there was a Reform movement, then everybody else that was left needed to be called something, and they called themselves Orthodox, right? So it's counterintuitive, but the Reform movement came before Orthodoxy, right? Because the Reform movement kind of forced Orthodoxy, to kind of pronounce themselves something else. So it's kind of interesting. So yes, Talmud, oral Torah, was very much called into question. And anything that was like sort of post-biblical in the now I'll use the term, the Orthodox world, was considered from Mount Sinai just as much as the 5 books of Moses were, right? That's the rabbis of the rabbis of Talmud basically declared their brand of Judaism, that it was actually came from Moses. It's a lot of chutzpah, but they did it, and it carried them a long way. But the Reformers said, no, that's a bunch of legend, and there might be some stuff to mine in there that might be worthy of study, but to live by what is basically Jewish law as defined by the Talmud was largely rejected. Later, the Torah itself was called into question by the Reformers because of biblical critics who looked into the Torah as literary critics and saw that there was, it was riddled with inconsistency, and the whole field of multiple authorship came into being, right? There was all these schools that created the Torah. Then the Reformers, who did they turn to after they definitely rejected the Talmud, and they were kind of like, the Torahs can be still taught, but it doesn't have ultimate authority. You know where they went next? The prophets. They loved the prophets because the prophets talked about right and wrong and justice, and that really appealed to the Reformers. But getting ahead of myself. All right, so that's one, oral law. What's something else the Reformers might have done back in the 19th century? Paul?
The role of women?
Yes, very early on. Now, there weren't women rabbis yet, but they did away with things like the mechitza, right? The part of the synagogue that separated men from women. Women were definitely part of leadership roles. Again, it developed and got much stronger as time went on, and especially when the United States comes in the picture. But there was definitely a sense of there was an archaic way of viewing the roles of the genders that the Reformers wanted to correct. Yes. Anybody else? Renee.
So I think a more general openness to secular learning, particularly scientific, mathematical, literature of the mainstream, and along with that, removing things like different kinds of dress and different kinds of habits that would separate you from the mainstream culture.
Yes. Yes. And clearly the idea was to both be modern, and again, this is 19th century modern, but modern and Jewish at the same time. And the feeling was you couldn't do that in the traditional way of being Jewish. So the mode of dress, for sure, changed, and the wearing of head covering was discarded. Prayer gear was reduced, if not eliminated, even in Germany in the 19th, or maybe even especially in Germany. I mean, if you think about Germany at that time, it was very, sort of buttoned up. And I think, there was this thought amongst the Reformers that mirrored a lot of the society that religion could be very sort of irrational and filled with superstition and old ways of thinking, and that included ways of dressing and those kind of things. And all of that was, we want to look like modern people and act like modern people, even as we go to synagogue and celebrate Jewish holidays. And we want both. We don't want to just have to take the whole kit and caboodle on. We can take some of it on and leave the rest to the dustbin of history, right? And it's important when we start getting into the 1999 platform. Some other things were the vernacular, right? That services didn't have to all be in Hebrew. That Jewish services could take on, especially the sermon. That was an important part of Jewish services for a very long time. That you could have the sermon in German and whatever other language was the vernacular of the country. You could have prayers not just in Hebrew, but you could translate the prayers into the vernacular. That was one that was important. Yes, Rudy.
That the men and the women wouldn't sit together.
Exactly. Yeah, that whole egalitarian kind of sensibility. So there were some more. Oh, one of them. I'm sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the music probably changed as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And there was, I think, especially early on, the reformers, they liked a little bit more order in their services. Whereas, if you think of a shtibel or a shul and everybody's sort of davening and everyone's kind of on their own page, kind of like, a shuckling and davening, and the reformers wanted more decorum, right? Which took a lot of forms. So that's true too. And then some kind of ideological things. The reformers dropped very early on the whole Kohen, Israel, Levite, in order to get called up for an aliyah, the first aliyah, you had to be a Kohen. They rejected that and said, this is, we're all Jews. There shouldn't be a tiered system. There was some changes in sort of theology. There was the whole notion of reincarnation, which is part of the Jewish prayer, the Givurot, right? That was, again, discarded as being too medieval and too ancient. So anyway, that's kind of the reform movement. So what happened was the reform movement then, in like the mid 19th century to the late 19th century, took root in the United States of America. And the early reformers in the 19th century in the United States of America were even more radical than their counterparts in Europe. They all came from Europe. Why is that? One reason is that the most radical German reformers were the ones who came to America, right? The most sort of, kind of like, we want to really reform. We want Sunday services, which was a thing for a while in the United States reform movement, as opposed to Shabbat, because in America, we work on Shabbat, right? People work on Saturday. The stores open on Saturday. Why can't we have services on Sunday, which is a natural day off? So some of the really well-known radical reformers made the move to America, and then that took hold here. The other reason was because it's America, and it was still a fairly new country. Europe, despite the fact that there were reformers in Europe had a lot of baggage. That's kind of where a lot of this Judaism grew up. I mean, if you think about people in black hats and fur coats, and that's all Poland and Eastern Europe. And it had a lot of the weight. So even people who were reformers might have had parents or grandparents who were trying to, who were rejecting their reforms. In America, right, the land of the free, which already kind of had this tilt towards, or a bias towards what's new and what, breaks from tradition. In this country, there was a little bit more maybe freedom to be a reformer than even in even in a place like, Germany of the 19th century. So I think those two forces sort of conspired, the radicals that came from Europe and the fact that we were in this sort of nascent stage of our country, which allowed for some sort of a new way of being Jewish. In fact, those reformers were very kind of, I would say the word I might want to use is arrogant. They felt that their brand of Judaism was going to be American Judaism, right? They felt like anyone in America who was more traditional would eventually come along to see the light, right? And I literally mean light. The Enlightenment was a part of this. This was a bigger discussion, but the Enlightenment played a role. There was a Jewish Enlightenment called the Haskalah, which played a role in all of this. But they really thought that their Judaism would be American Judaism. And so they called their Siddur, the early Siddur for the Reform movement in the United States was called Minhag America, the American Minhag, the American way of praying. You guys probably, people that grew up in the Reform movement, what is the name? Now it's called the Union for Reform Judaism. Who knows what the name of that union of all the Reformed Jewish congregations was before they changed their name a few years ago? Anybody? UAHC, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. I think that was the name until like the 80s. So they thought their congregations were American congregations, right? And that all Jewish congregations in America were going to be like them. Still to this day, the rabbinic, the rabbinic association that I belong to, that Rabbi Susan and Jim and Danny and Karen, we all belong to, is the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Again, they really, what happened was, and the Reform movement is still, very large in the United States. It's the largest movement, but the conservative movement came along as an aside. They were the last to come along of the three big movements. And they said, well, we don't want to be Orthodox, because by now Orthodoxy was a thing, but the reformers are going too far, especially in this country. And that's why when they created, we want to conserve more of Judaism than the reformers do. And that's how the conservative movement started, both in Europe and in America. Okay, so here we are, 19th century, 1885, and a group of rabbis, American rabbis, most of whom I think were not born in this country, but born in, American rabbinical students in the Reform movement had to learn German at the same time they were learning Hebrew. That's how important German, the German, and I know it feels funny now in light of, 50 years later is the Holocaust, right? It all feels very strange, but it was a whole different world. And there was a reverence for Germany amongst the early reformers in America. And most of these rabbis who gathered in Pittsburgh, of all places, in 1885 were European born. And they created what was become to be known as the Pittsburgh Platform, which we're about to look at some of it. That it was Congregation Rodef Shalom in Pittsburgh. All right. So it's, you'll read it. So I'm gonna not tip my kippah that I'm not wearing about what it says or what I think about it yet. 100 plus years go by, and there were 2 or 3 platforms in between Pittsburgh 1885 and Pittsburgh 1999. But Pittsburgh 1999 was really an attempt by some in the Reform movement, some leaders, some rabbis, repudiates too strong of a word, but to really show whoever was interested, the Jewish world, that this is a different Reform Judaism. And so they very intentionally went to Pittsburgh to create this new platform at the turn of the 21st century. But before they got to Pittsburgh, there was controversy. And the controversy was they put out some early versions of this 1999 platform, and it was met with a lot of resistance. A lot of people said, this doesn't seem like Reform Judaism to me. And it got, I think people heard it, and I think it went through 8 to 10. I'm thinking about Paul Wagman now, who does this kind of work, but went 8 to 10 revisions until finally they were able to agree, the powers that be, on this new set of reform principles, which is what became known as the new Pittsburgh platform of 1999, which was also, I guess, ratified in Congregation Rodef Shalom. Very symbolic, right? A little bit more than 100 years later, another Pittsburgh platform. So you at least know that this platform, the 99 platform, however you're going to think of it, it was modified quite a great deal from its original, from how its framers wanted it to be. And we could talk a little bit about that on the other end. So that was a lot. I just jumped 100 and some years. But I hope that was a helpful framing. Before we get into the first set of reading the text, does anyone have anything they want to ask or say? Paul.
When was the conservative movement founded, Randy?
Yeah, it's also 19th century, but later in the 19th century, and also started in Europe, but really took off in the United States. So they all are kind of products of the same sort of energy, right? There was this new sort of, there was choices is a modern thing, right? So yes, they all kind of came, reform movement first. And, there were antecedents of the reform movement as well. Spinoza, who wouldn't have called himself a reformed Jew, but clearly Reformed Jews of the 19th century revered Spinoza, who had been excommunicated, right, in the 18th century for his reform-mindedness, right? So all these things have antecedents, but the 19th century is really, and again, emancipation, enlightenment, all of those movements that we know created the modern world. And I guess I'll say that the 1999 platform, the new term at that time, and I think, is postmodernity. And I really, and we'll talk about it, but I think that the 99 platform really speaks to the fact that we're not really in the modern era anymore. We think of ourselves as modern people, and we're certainly contemporary because we're alive now. But what the intellectuals of our day are saying, we've already entered into post-modernity, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, more later. But that's kind of that we've already moved out of the modern era, which I really, lately, a lot of things have happened in society, forget about religion, that make me really kind of, I'm thinking a lot about post-modernity. I don't know if I welcome it, but I think we're definitely in it for sure. Thank you, Paul. Anybody else, questions or comments? Okay. All right. So what I'm gonna do, I don't think, unless somebody really, really nimble can tell me how to do this, I think it's good. I don't think I can share the text to all the breakout groups. So what I'm going to do is, in the big group, I'm going to show the text. I'm going to have you guys put on your thinking caps or take a picture or take some notes or whatever. And then I'm going to send you into your rooms with the text, give you, I don't know, 5-7 minutes of discussion, come back, we'll process. And I think I have 5 rounds of that. So we'll see if we get to all 5. The platforms are modeled, both of them, after what Jewish theologians call if a Jewish theologian who's worth their salt has to hit on 3 topics. They're God, Torah, Israel. They don't, and philosophers, theologians, they don't have to agree on what is God and what is Torah and what is Israel, but they have to address, if you want to have Martin Buber, Abraham Joshua Heschel, Mordecai Kaplan, they got all these philosophers. They supposedly they had to hit on all three of those areas. So these platforms also hit on the three areas, and that's how I divided them up. We're not looking at the whole platform. We're not looking at all of either platform. I've done some selective editing. I didn't edit the platforms, but I'm choosing the excerpts that I'm showing you. Does that make sense? So you can look it up. It's easy to find if you're interested. But for the purpose of the class, I'm in every breakout, I'm giving you a passage from the 1885 platform and a passage from the 1999 platform. So the first one is going to focus on God. All right. So I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to read it out loud. Here they come. All right. Everybody with me? Somebody give me a yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay. I'm going to read it. Just it feel that that's going to be the easiest. I wrote God with an exclamation point. I have this whole thing about that sort of superstition where you're supposed to write God with a dash. I've never resonated with that. I don't mind spelling God full G-O-D, but I do love this. I think this might be Arthur Waskow, Karen, who came up with, maybe Zalman, not the dash, use an exclamation point. You're going to talk about God and you want to use a symbol, use an exclamation point for God's sake, right? Okay, so these are passages that speak to a view on God. And here's what they said in 1885. We recognize in every religion an attempt to grasp the infinite, and in every mode, source, or book of revelation held sacred in any religious system, the consciousness of the indwelling of God in humans, right? I'll read it without genderizing it as it's written. We hold that Judaism presents the highest conception of the God idea as taught in our holy scriptures and developed and spiritualized by the Jewish teachers in accordance with the moral and philosophical progress of their respective ages. We maintain that Judaism preserved and defended midst continual struggles and trials and under enforced isolation this God idea as the central religious truth for the human race. So that's 1885. That's not all they had to say about God. This is an excerpt. And here's a section from 1999. Again, both Reform platforms. This is what they say in 99. We affirm the reality of oneness of God, even as we may differ in our understanding of the divine presence. We affirm that the Jewish people is bound to God by an eternal brit, a covenant, as reflected in our varied understanding of creation, revelation, and redemption. Okay, let me give you like a second or two to look at this, absorb it a little bit. I'm going to stop my share in a few seconds. Okay, all right, here we go. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm going to give
There's no way, Randy, that to put a link back to those things for us to see.
We tried. We experiment. We went. Autumn and I were on.
You would have to do it after we're in the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I don't know. I'll try.
It was really difficult to make it a truly public link through Google Docs. It was like Randy was going to have to like individually approve like 20 people. We tried.
Huh.
It was difficult.
I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm saying I can't do it.
So we can't do it tonight.
Yeah, yes. So I hope you had a little, I won't get, so let's do like 5 minutes. I hope you got the gist. I try to make them kind of bites as opposed to like a whole lot. I know it's a lot of words, but it could have been more words. Yes, Marian.
One thing you could do When it was on the screen, I took a screenshot of it.
Yeah,
so
I
that
thought
have a
about that too.
copy If people really wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to put it up really quick one more time?
Yeah.
Okay.
I took a photo of it on my phone.
All these industrious people. Hold on.
Yeah, I go get my phone.
There it is.
Not yet.
Okay.
No. Got it.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay. All right. Next trick. I'm going to try to put you guys in groups. Okay. Hold on. All right. So I'm assigning automatically. I'm creating 7. Are there 4? No, wait. How many are there? Somebody?
4, 12, 14, including you.
So if I do, so I should do 6 groups then. We'll see how that works. It might be, there might be more than 2 in a group in some groups. That's fine. Because I'm going to not be in a group.
Okay.
Okay. All right, here we go. So you guys know this, at some point when I stop it, it'll give you like a minute or something to come back. Right. Anything else, Autumn, is there anything else I should tell everybody about the break?
I'll say here in a second, a little screen will pop up that says the host is inviting you to join a breakout room. You're gonna click join the room. Don't exit out of it. Click join the room and it'll say
Join the room. All right, this is our Beit Midrash, people. Here we go. Love ya. All right. Oh, all these are, oh, these are nice rooms. Okay, here we go. I'm opening all the rooms. You guys followed instructions nicely. You got 20 seconds. I hope I didn't send them into like cyberspace or hyperspace or space. All right. I was worried there. I was worried about you guys. I was like a parent. I was worried about everybody. Where'd you go? But everyone seems to have returned, which is very awesome. All right. Welcome back. I missed you. I will ask you before our next one if it was too much time or too little time, but let's get into it. Anybody want to offer up thoughts about the two passages, specifically dealing with God? What rang out? Go ahead, Paul. Yes, you're still on mute.
All right. I think we had a consensus that the 1885 statement was considerably more full of Jewish pride and sort of Jewish. We know better than anybody else what we're talking about here, folks. The second statement was more self-effacing. The first statement, as Autumn noted, was it was considerably longer, or maybe you just excerpted more, but it seemed it definitely seemed more.
Yeah, I get so I want to say that there was sort of, especially at that time, this sort of notion of this sort of that this ethical monotheism that that really kind of came from Reformed Jews, that like this was the gift of the Jewish people, was this sort of monotheism that really kind of focused on morality and ethics and righteousness. And I think there is a lot of that, and that did kind of jump out at me. So thank you for that. There's something else though that I think at least it really attracted the ears of the 1999 framers, that they really wanted to sort of, let's say, they wanted to make sure that was no longer the way that at least they thought, or they wanted Reformed Jews to think. So that's a leading thing, but go ahead, Linda.
Okay, well, Thomas and I thought that what we read into it was that in the 85 reading, it was clear that all had the same understanding and belief in a God. And in 99, we read that there's a difference of opinion of that. Not everybody has the same understanding, and maybe not everyone has a belief in a God.
Fair enough. That's very interesting, and I think you could see it in there. What is God called in 1885?
God idea.
God idea. Now, yeah, and a lot of people love that, but by 1999, they're not there. In fact, I think, there's a few things. A couple are coming up even more so. But I think this is one of the things that the people that were behind 1999 wanted to like kind of exorcise, not exercise, but to sort of repudiate, which was this notion of a God idea, which was obviously very impersonal, and actually, very philosophical in the kind of the classic Greek philosophy mold, that, thinking about God as a God you pray to, or a God you talk to, or a God you yearn for, or God you have a relationship with, was very kind of, that was not something that people that felt a little too, mystical or scary or emotional or irrational, right? Whereas by 1999, they're talking about a relationship with God, right? We affirm the reality and oneness of God. There's no affirming of the reality of God in 1885. It's the God idea. So again, I got the things that you got, that the people who spoke got as well. But I do think the most salient thing for the renewal of this platform, or the revisionist platform, was that in this section was that phrase God idea. Did anyone else want to go ahead, Karen?
What struck Philip and I was that the universalism in the 1885, like they're trying to broaden this understanding of God, leaning into that language of God concept and affirming the God concept in all traditions. Whereas the 1999 is more a statement of how we as Jewish people understand God, and that all Jewish people are part of this covenant. Like it says, even though we have different understandings of this, so the focus kind of shifts between the two as well.
You know, you made me think, I like the two, there's two terms that are, you might think they're similar, but they're really not. You're right, there is a universality in the 1885, and there's a nod to diversity in the 1999, which both terms are resonant with me, but they're very different. They're used to, you know, so that might be sort of a little of the confusion. There is a universalism in the earlier one without a nod to diversity, but there's a nod to diversity in the later one without maybe a focus on universality. So thank you for that. And the other, I'll get you in a second, Lisa. The other term that you brought up, Karen, was covenant, which is in 1999. Is that what you're going to talk about? Go ahead, Lisa. Is that you're going to talk about?
I was really struck by that. There's explicit reference to the covenant, which suggests that there's a special relationship between Jews and God, which is not explicitly stated in the 1885 one. The 1885 one says that Jews have the most developed idea of God. But the 1999 one is very explicit that there is a particular, they don't use the word chosen, but they do use that notion of covenant, which means that there's a special relationship there.
Yeah, and this is where postmodern comes in, I think, at least one of the places where postmodern comes in. So the idea of postmodernity, as far as I understand it, is that, you know, that there's the postmodern critique of modernity, is that modernity threw everything out. You know, what's the term? You throw the baby out with the bathwater, or don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so the postmodern school of thought is that that's what happened in the modern world, is like in our rush to be something new, we gave up a lot of things that were valuable, right, in pre-modern time. And there's also things in pre-modern time that were anathema. And I think postmodern philosophy would say, and we don't want that either. We want the best of the modern and the best of the pre-modern. And this covenant idea, the covenant in this 19th century Judaism, that covenant was old. That's what Abraham, that was Abraham. That was, you know, that was circumcision. That was, you know, it felt very kind of old world. But all of a sudden, in 1999, it's back. You know, it's almost like, you know, we did away with that concept. And now, you know, this generations later, it's come, even with liberal Reform Jews. And I make no mistake, the second, and you'll see this throughout, the second statement is not, it's not like, it's not orthodox. It's still a statement of Reform Jews, but there is a postmodern tilt to it. There's a desire to return to some things that maybe had gotten, at least according to the people who framed it, had gotten left behind. And that kind of brings us to, unless does anyone have any, yeah, go ahead, Phil. Unmute, buddy.
Oh, sorry. I'm also thinking of the time period that both were written. And I have the sense that in the first one, in the 1800s, they're trying, the Jewish community, what we now call had kept themselves separate and were forced to be separate by larger society, ghettos, communities. And so this group was trying to fit into larger society, and they were trying to justify, we're like you. We believe in this God concept. We all do, you do. They were pandering to them so that they could be accepted. And then they throw a nod to the remaining Orthodox community but of course we recognize we've been forced to do this because of the pain that we as a community have had, which the mainstream Christian community has not had. They could be more reflexive. In the 1991, we don't have to do that anymore. And so now we can not actually say, God is God. Where before they didn't want to get into a fight with Catholics and Lutherans over, is there a different God that we're all praying to? God is a concept. You all could. Now we're willing to say 1999, there's only one God. We all pray to it through different means, even within Judaism.
Beautiful. So you said a lot of things. And I the one word you didn't use that was like sort of like I was waiting for you to use was assimilation, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
There's two ways to look at 1885, and the truth is probably somewhere in between. One way is a positive way, which was this was sort of a, again, like a group of sort of enlightened people who were trying to come up with a new way to be religious and Jewish. The negative critique of them was that they were really just trying to fit in, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why classical Reform Judaism with Sunday services, with more decorum, with
choirs,
all of those things, right? The critique is that they were just trying to fit in, assimilate. I think that the truth is probably in between there, but it's good that you brought it up because I think it's important to put it out there. And you're right, it's maybe a positive thing that there was a confidence in the people who wrote 1999 that they didn't have to be as afraid maybe to not fit in. So that's a really, the other thing you said, was just listening, you said God as a concept, that there's an amazing John Lennon song called God, where he says God as a concept. So I was just listening to it today.
Goes with our long hair.
Autumn, go.
So on the topic of assimilation, that was something that stood out to me as well, because some of the phrasing in the 1885 one, it honestly parallels a lot of similar Christian statements that were made by denominations at the time, like some of the formulas that it's using about like, what did it say? Like saying like the highest conception of the God idea as taught in our holy scriptures and developed and spiritualized. I'm like, that is so similar to just a lot of other writings that were happening at the time. And that doesn't surprise me given the timing of it. And then a second piece that stood out to me was how in the 1999, like it uses the Hebrew word for covenant, just the use of Hebrew,
no doubt,
which was not in the first one. And so that stood out to me too.
No doubt. And if you look at Reform prayer books from, the 19th and early 20th centuries, there's more English than Hebrew. There is Hebrew, like the Shema is in Hebrew, but almost everything. People remember the Old Union prayer book, and it was largely in English. And now if you look at, obviously at CRC, we have our own prayer book, but if you look at the Reform Movement prayer book now, it's a whole different animal. Lots of Hebrew, right? And a mixture, right? It's not as much Hebrew as in an Orthodox Siddur, but there's been a return to Hebrew, and you're right, Autumn, it's very much reflected all throughout 1999 platform, they threw in Hebrew phrases almost as a trope, right? To say, look, we claim this. This is part of who we are. Yes. All right. No problem, Linda. We'll miss you. I'm going to move on because I want to be respectful of time. I'm going to do two texts at once. I split the Torah into two. I didn't actually literally split a Torah in two. But I took I took passages from each platform that had to do with the actual, Torah, the Bible, and then another that had to do with sort of mitzvahs and Jewish law and, kind of oral Torah. Okay, and I'm going to read them both to you guys, and then we'll do another Chavruta time. So unless there's any, I don't want to. Did anyone have anything more on the God part? the God idea. Yeah. I still love, I have to say, I don't know what it says about me, and maybe I'm giving myself away too soon, but I really love the 1885 platform, but that's just me. All right.
He likes the early one.
He likes the early one.
All right. So this is Torah. Okay. So this is about really literally the Torah, the scroll, but it's very interesting. Listen to what they said in 1885. We recognize in the Bible the record of the consecration of the Jewish people to its mission as the priest of the one God, and value it as the most potent instrument of religious and moral instruction. We hold that the modern discoveries of scientific research in the domain of nature and history are not antagonistic to the doctrines of Judaism. The Bible, there should be like a colon, I think. The Bible reflecting the primitive idea of its own age, and at times clothing its conception of divine providence and justice, dealing with people in miraculous narratives, clothing its conception of divine providence and justice, dealing with people in miraculous narratives. Okay. 1999, we affirm that Torah is the foundation of Jewish life. We cherish the truths revealed in Torah, God's ongoing revelation to our people, and the record of our people's ongoing relationship with God. We affirm that Torah is a manifestation of Ahavat Olam, God's eternal love for the Jewish people and for all humanity. Okay, so I'm going to give everyone a little time if you want to take a picture or jot down some notes, because I'm going to throw up one more text. So a few more seconds. Everyone good?
Hang on 1 second, please.
Okay. Yeah, pipe up, please.
Okay.
All right. So that's Torah. I wrote text in parentheses. Next is Torah, and I think I wrote mitzvahs. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, mitzvah. Okay. See, I was doing a 1999 thing using the Hebrew phrase. All right, this one in 1885, they said, we recognize in the Mosaic legislation a system of training the Jewish people for its mission during its national life in Palestine. And today we accept as binding only its moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies as elevate and sanctify our lives, but reject, I'm sorry for the typo, all such as are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization, right? We accept this binding only its moral laws and maintain only such ceremonies as elevate and sanctify our lives, but reject all such as are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization. They go on to say, we hold that all such Mosaic and rabbinical laws as regulate diet, priestly purity, and dress originated in ages and under the influence of ideas entirely foreign to our present mental and spiritual state. They fail to impress the modern Jew with a spirit of priestly holiness. Their observance in our days is apt rather to obstruct than to further modern spiritual elevation. Okay. Now in 1999, in terms of mitzvot and Jewish, let's say, laws, customs, traditions, to use the word from 1885, ceremonies, I guess. We are called by Torah to lifelong study in the home, in the synagogue, and in every place where Jews gather to learn and teach. Through Torah study, we are called to mitzvot, commandments, the means by which we make our lives holy. We are committed to the ongoing study of the whole array of mitzvot and to the fulfillment of those that address us as individuals and as a community. Some of these mitzvot, sacred obligations, have long been observed by Reform Jews. Others, both ancient and modern, demand renewed attention as the result of the unique context of our own times. Okay. So go ahead. There's 1885. In terms of this category, I put this all under Torah. And then go ahead, Paul. I only have Paul on my screen, so I see him taking a picture. And then here's 1999. And I'm gonna give it a few more seconds and I'm gonna stop the share. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Randy,
Yes,
it's Marion.
I see you.
Before we leave
Yes.
you to go to our little rooms, could you throw out an example of something that demanded renewed attention?
Oh, I think that's sure. I mean, I think there's plenty. I think
Just to focus.
I think keeping kosher is for sure. I think they were specifically talking about, see, like this gave ahead of ourselves a little bit, but in 1885 they said what? They said dress, diet, where is it? Yeah, diet, priestly dress, priestly purity and dress, right? So wearing kippahs, wearing a talit, keeping kosher, going to the mikvah. I mean, I'm just using those 3 categories from 1885. So yes, is that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, language is funny. I mean, some of this, and I think it kind of Autumn sort of remarked on this, some of this is just a function of people talked a little differently, even English in 1885 than we do now. I mean, I think that's definitely part of this, but not all. It's certainly not the whole story, but there is like a little bit more, like I think we would probably call it a little more sort of formal and highfalutin. Like, you know, if you went to a synagogue in the 19th century, the sermon would be like 45 minutes to an hour long. Protestant churches too, right? And they'd be very sort of formal and you know, sort of the language would be very sort of you know, kind of a highbrow, which is different than how even, you know, in religious settings we talk these days. So that's part of it for sure. But I also think
it's also, I believe, the language in both cases of committee writing.
That's
in which a tremendous amount of energy has gone into picking exactly the right verb, which suggests but doesn't commit.
Yes, and I would say more in 1999 than 1885. One, because there were less rabbis that did the 1885, right? I think it was like something like 20 some odd rabbis. Obviously there were less rabbis in America anyway in 1885. And in 1999, not only were there more people involved, but as I said, it went through a tortured, years-long kind of process of getting approval.
But it's as if the former were written by Dickens or Thackeray, and the second one was written by Hemingway.
That's nicely done. Nicely done. I like that. Thank you. That's very fitting for a university series, I feel like. You've elevated the class.
The style of the times was influential.
No doubt. Who said Randy?
How did rabbis come about then in the beginning with, or any group, to have the authority to then create rabbis?
That's another.
Well, right away they established seminary. Hebrew Union College by 1885 was already.
Oh, Philip, there's a secret handshake. And they're not going to talk.
Put it in the chat.
Listen, I mean, listen, some of the rabbis that came from Germany were already very highly regarded. They were leaders in not only in Reformed, they were Reformed Jewish leaders. Germany. And that leadership transferred when they came to America. They were, some of them wrote prayer books.
I'm thinking of the original ones in Germany.
Yeah, well, I mean, like any reform movement, like they were kind of, they were newcomers, and probably the people who were the most charismatic and the most sort of kind of, I'm going to use the word ballsy. No, I'm not going to use that word. I'm sorry. Take it back.
Let me ask this: were there rabbis who broke away from the more traditional, who were part of the founding of the reform, who already were ordained as rabbis?
Yeah.
There was a rabbi named Eisendrath. There was a rabbi named Kohler or Kaler. These are names that, like, we learned in some history of Reform Judaism class in rabbinical school. But yeah, I mean, there was like 3 or 4 like kind of marquee, names that really
existing rabbis. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, you guys, I'm gonna let you go. I'm gonna put you in groups. Let me ask. I did 5 minutes. Did that seem about right?
Yes, especially since it's 8:30.
Okay. I think we only have one more to go, because it's Israel's next, and that's both Israel, the nation, or the Zionist idea, and Israel as a peoplehood. So those are also split into 2. So we'll do those 2 together. So we got this one, then we'll come back and see the Israel text. We'll do a little chavruta on that, and then we'll wrap it up. So I don't want anyone to think I'm going to go on forever, because I wouldn't do that to you all. Anyway, groups, here we go. 5 minutes to, so they're putting you guys in the same rooms. Can I change that? Let's see. Well, maybe I can't. Huh. It's okay.
You have to cancel it out and start it new.
Yeah.
Oh, recreate. You're right.
There you go.
Huh. I love that it says recreate. That feels very kind of theological. Okay.
Is that 1999 or 89, would you say?
Both.
No, 2029.
All right, guys, here you go. See you in about 5 minutes. Hey, Guan. Is it you and me? Guan, are you there? Oh. How was it? Before I open it up a little bit, I wanted to, Philip brought up a really good point, and there's just a few names since you asked. The one that they would revoke my ordination if anyone knew that I forgot, Isaac Mayer Wise, who is the founder of the Hebrew Union College in the late 19th century. Don't tell anybody I forgot old Isaac. But I did mention Abraham Geiger, who was really a radical reformer, and then Kaufman Kaler, and the other one who's often talked about is Samuel Holdheim. These were all 19th century German-born, then American reform rabbis. Okay, so those are yeah. All right, let me hear what you guys talked about and what you think. And these were certainly memorable from 1885, and again, I think part of the impetus for this latest group to create their own statement. So who wants to get the ball rolling? Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, so what Paul and I discerned was a sort of shift of importance from God to Torah. That whereas in the 1888 or 85 statement, God is the central principle. And it's that which connects us to, this monotheistic idea that all right-thinking people have. Whereas there are different ideas about God in 99. And all of a sudden now Torah, which before was even slightly suspect because of some of its miraculous stories that couldn't really be countenanced, given scientific, knowledge. Now it's like, okay, but still Torah is central, and it's part of, we're studying it in the home, in the synagogue, wherever Jews congregate. Now all of a sudden Torah becomes the one thing that Jews can focus on.
Nice. Nicely said by one of our Torah study leaders. I like that too. Good pitch. Philip.
I saw it a little different. I saw the 1895 again going to assimilation, but now specifically in Germany, in a Lutheran country that had broken away from Catholic Rome, where God is this deity that you just have to respond to. Lutheranism and Judaism, the indwelling of God. We have more, we're trying to link to that indwelling thing, which I found interesting, was not mentioned in the 99 version.
Wait, I'm gonna have to interrupt you. I have a message that says I'm being signed out because I'm signed in on another device, but I'm not. What should I click OK on this?
We may lose.
Let me check something really quick.
Are we up to it?
Oh, you know what, Autumn, I came in on CRC's account. Does that mean maybe someone's I'm sorry, Philip.
No, that's fine. Is
somebody trying to come in?
I'm trying to check to see. There shouldn't be any other meetings tonight. Yeah, no one should be on this account.
Okay. Here, I'm gonna X this out. Let's see what happens. Or I could just leave it there. Hold on. I'm not gonna sign OK. I'm gonna close it. Okay.
Randy, I've got to bow out anyway. Thank you.
All right, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, I'm back. I don't know. All right.
You're still here.
Go ahead, Philip.
No, the only thing that John I noticed was in the 99 version, there's no indwelling of God. It's all about now God a little bit more external based on the covenant. But then that whole thing about decision by committee shows up, because we all then look at it. We could be different in terms of creationism and everything else. That's okay. That's a result of committee. The only thing we can agree on is that Abraham was the patriarch. After that, different views.
And again, maybe that universalism / diversity sort of schism is at play here. Very interesting.
Except there's not that indwelling. Again, it talks about the Jewish people is connected to God, not they are. It's not individuals. It's a singular community is connected to God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was bothered by that, actually, that we lost the individual.
Yeah. Thank you. Anybody else want to respond? What'd you talk about in your groups? Two phrases really jump out at me from 1885 that, I think were part of the radical nature. One was already, talking about how the Bible reflected the primitive ideas of its own age, right? That there was the moral laws, meaning like, the ethical laws were somehow relevant and eternal, but the other stuff, not just the stuff about the temple and sacrifices, but a lot of the other stuff, we can't even relate to, is what they said in 1885. There's no mention of that in 1999. In fact, it feels very, like has been said, very present. And then in the second set of texts, this was very strong language. They failed to impress the modern Jew with the spirit of priestly holiness. In other words, we still want priestly holiness. We can't, the way they described it back then isn't working for us now. And in fact, some of the stuff in Jewish tradition, they said in 1885, is more like to obstruct our spirituality than to enhance it. That's pretty bold. So anybody else want to chime in? I think what I want to do is I want to keep hearing from people, and maybe I'll show you the rest of the text as the big group. We won't split up again, just for the sake of time. But let's hear what did people share? Yes, Lisa.
I was just going to say is that the 1999 description of the Torah as being, demonstrative of God's love. I mean, it just sees the Torah as a positive document, and it doesn't make judgments about that there are good parts and there are bad parts. I mean, it basically says it's worth being looked at and being studied and appreciated for what it is.
Yeah. Yes. And there's also this whole, what you made me think of is, this whole notion that and that's part of postmodernity too. Sometimes you have to go through the rejection in order to come back to something and appreciate it. In other words, like if it weren't for these reformers cutting us off, saying the Torah, there's so much in there that's sort of just old-fashioned and irrelevant. Because we were able to make that move, we're now able to make this move of returning to it and accepting it with its warts and its right, and say, but there's still something really beautiful there for us to learn from, live by. So there is like some kind of like, I don't know if it's an arc or it's just a journey where you reject something only to then be able to better bring it back, because with a wholeness, knowing the parts that were rejected, we haven't lost our intellect, but maybe we've, kind of come to sort of an understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I wonder if that we're also, most of us, I think, no longer constrained, or even I might even use the word hobbled by a necessary belief that every single word of the Torah, of the Tanakh, is literal truth. And therefore, we can see it in a metaphorical sense as artistic truth or
poetic,
principled truth, or really sometimes we can just see it for the charm of the narrative.
That's beautifully said. And that's also, the other part of postmodernism is deconstructing texts, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of partly what you're talking about as well. It's like, right, we can accept the stuff that because of its value as metaphor of poetry as legend. Really nice. Autumn.
Oh, sorry, I was scratching my head.
Oh, you're allowed. Anybody else, Chavruta, sharings or gleanings or enlightenings. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you guys the Israel text and then just kind of see if there's anything that to be said about those. I hope. So we've gone God, we've gone Torah, and now Israel. And again, two different understandings of Israel. All right, so here's the problem. It's not, let's see if I can do this. All right. You guys see that on my screen?
Yeah.
So it's scary. Okay.
So my new theory is that since Zoom thought that the event was going to end at 8:30, it's probably like telling you like, hey,
okay.
But there's nothing scheduled after this. So you're good.
Okay. Okay, cool. So here's Israel, and I put the term nation state. What do we think about Israel? I'm not sure if you guys can right now before you read it, maybe make some kind of educated guess as to what's going to happen here. But in 1885, this is what we said about the Reformed Jewish leaders said about Israel, Palestine. By the way, there was no Israel in 1885, right? But there was already Zionism. There was already people who were Jews who were kind of talking about creating a nation, a Jewish nation in that land. We recognize in the modern era of universal culture of heart and intellect, the approaching of the realization of Israel's great messianic hope for the establishment of the kingdom of truth, justice, and peace among all humans. We consider ourselves no longer a nation, but a religious community, and therefore expect neither a return to Palestine, nor a sacrificial worship under the sons of Aaron, nor the restoration of any of the laws concerning the Jewish state. Okay? Not Zionistic at all. By 1999, Reformed Jewish leaders said, we are committed to Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel, and rejoice in its accomplishments. We affirm the unique qualities of living in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and encourage Aliyah, immigration to Israel. We affirm that both Israeli and diaspora Jewry should remain vibrant and interdependent communities. As we urge Jews who reside outside Israel to learn Hebrew as a living language and to make periodic visits to Israel in order to study and to deepen their relationship to the land and its people, so do we affirm that Israeli Jews have much to learn from the religious life of diaspora Jewish communities. Okay, so that's Zionism. And now here's more kind of peoplehood. And this is long, so I apologize. Okay, but this is kind of the social justice piece. This is the piece where there's more agreement than conflict between the two platforms. So in 1885, we said, in full accordance with the spirit of the Mosaic legislation, which strives to regulate the relations between rich and poor, we deem it our duty to participate in the great task of modern times, to solve on the basis of justice and righteousness the problems presented by the contrasts and evils of the present organization of society. We recognize in Judaism a progressive religion. This is 1885, ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason. We are convinced of the utmost necessity of preserving the historical identity with our great past. Christianity and Islam, being daughter religions of Judaism, we appreciate their providential mission to aid in the spreading of monotheistic and moral truth. We acknowledge that the spirit of broad humanity of our age is our ally in the fulfillment of our mission, and therefore we extend the hand of fellowship to all who cooperate with us in the establishment of the reign of truth and righteousness amongst people. All right, 1999. We bring Torah into the world where we strive to fulfill the highest ethical mandates in our relationships with others and with all God's creation. Partners with God in Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, we are called to help bring nearer the Messianic age. We seek dialogue and joint action with people of other faiths in the hope that together we can bring peace, freedom, and justice to our world. We are obligated to pursue tzedek, justice and righteousness, and to narrow the gap between the affluent and the poor, to act against discrimination and oppression, to pursue peace, to welcome the stranger, to protect the earth's biodiversity and natural resources, and to redeem those in physical, economic, and spiritual bondage. In so doing, we reaffirm social action and social justice as a central prophetic focus of traditional Reform Jewish belief and practice. We affirm the mitzvah of tzedakah, set aside portions of our earnings and our time to provide for those in need. These acts bring us closer to fulfilling the prophetic call to translate the words of Torah into the works of our hands. We embrace religious and cultural pluralism as an expression of the vitality of Jewish communal life in Israel and the diaspora. We pledge to fulfill Reform Judaism's historic commitment to the complete equality of women and men in Jewish life. We are an inclusive community opening doors to Jewish life to people of all ages, to varied kinds of families, to all regardless of their sexual orientation, to gerim, those who have converted to Judaism, and to individuals and families, including the intermarried, who strive to create, and to all individuals and families, including the intermarried, who strive to create a Jewish home. I'm trying to stop the share. There, okay. Okay. First thing is the last thing, which is I would, unless anyone wants to disagree, though the last statements are very similar, obviously, with differences in language of the time. But in terms of the social justice orientation of Reform Judaism, 1885, 1999, very much in accordance, I think, with each other, with, again, differences in the way it's spoken. But boy, oh boy, when it comes to Israel, the nation, or Palestine, as it's called in 1885, that's a big thing. Reform Judaism was much of Reform Judaism, I should say, and certainly Reform Jewish leadership was anti-Zionist, did not want there to be a movement to make a nation homeland for the Jews in the Middle East. For lots of reasons, we could talk about it, but if you didn't know that part of Reform Jewish history, it's very, very glaring, and part of what Reform Judaism is. Obviously, not the case anymore. There are anti-Zionist Reform Jews, but the Reform Jewish movement has very much embraced, with criticism for sure, but has embraced Israel as a homeland for Jews from all over the world. So we kind of end where we started, because I did start with talking about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. But I'm going to throw it open to anybody. Those last passages, previous passages, anything about the two platforms. Let's have a few minutes of conversation. Karen.
So I have a question about the emphasis on prophets, on social justice, on Tikkun Olam. How did it shape the approach to the rest of Judaism to those concepts? Because it seems to me like Reform Judaism took this real, and some of this comes from the last class you taught on this real focused energy on that. And did it shift the energy of the broader Jewish community, which seems very active to me on those?
Yeah,
did it influence historically?
Yeah, I think that the prophet thing was more, I think it was more what rabbis wanted to preach on, right? They would rather preach about the prophets than about Torah, and certainly about oral Torah. I think that probably I don't think the prophets translated as much to sort of even the Reform Jewish population, the prophetic call to pursue justice. But I'm not sure if this whole thing, prophetic Judaism, was much more like a rabbi thing, than did it really permeate into your typical Jewish home. I don't think so. The Reform Jewish prayer books definitely quoted the prophets a lot and made the prophetic, especially the ones that were about justice and peace, part of the prayers more than they were in the traditional prayer book. The traditional prayer book leaned more into the Psalms than the prophets, and the Reform Prayer Book leaned more into the prophets than the Psalms. So that's one way maybe it influenced. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other thoughts, comments, questions, notions, ideas? Was the 1885 platform something that many people or that you all were cognizant of? Was it something that was on your radar a little bit, or was it brand new? A little bit? Yeah, it's funny. It really, I mean, I will say this, I was in rabbinical school. I was ordained in 2000. So I was in seminary when this platform was being debated, and I had a class with a theologian, kind of well known, I guess, in Jewish circles, named Eugene Borowitz, who was sort of like he passed away since, but he's kind of like one of the premier Reformed theologians. And we had a whole class, all these conversations about it. And I will tell you that my classmates, by and large, detested the 1885 platform, like really had a visceral dislike for it. These were, a lot of my classmates rapped to fill-in when they would be, I've rapped to fill-in, but I certainly wasn't my spiritual practice. But a number of my classmates were very insistent about rapping to fill-in on weekday services. So like, a statement that turns its nose up at things like that. So it's just very interesting to me that, for me, again, like I'm a modern / postmodern person, but there's a lot in 1885 that really still resonates with me, and it didn't with a lot of my contemporaries, for what it's worth. So and here's the other thing I would bring into this conversation. Remember, I told you the 1999 went through like dozens of revisions. What do you think? And the revisions, the rumor was the revisions were because it went too far, right? It was too tilted towards traditionalism. So imagine what 1999, given what it already sounds like, imagine what it sounded like before it got, there were voices in opposition. It's kind of interesting to think about. I'm sure there's a way to get your hands on it, but I haven't seen many earlier drafts. So that's something that I'm thinking about. Anybody else?
You said you did see periodic drafts?
I feel like I think I did back in school, but I don't, I mean, again, the reform movement has changed. In some ways, it's again, like, I think ending with that social justice piece is important, because in that way, it hasn't gotten more, let's use the term, not politically, but religiously right-wing, more traditional. It has not. It's in some ways it's become more progressive in that sense. But in other senses, in terms of reclaiming traditions that have been discarded, 1885 reflects, those of you who were in St. Louis and were Reform growing up, there were synagogues that in St. Louis that would not let you come into the synagogue with a kippah on your head. That was from that was a vestige of 1885 Reform Judaism. The fact that you now come into Reform synagogues, those same synagogues, and see Jews with a talit and a kippah, and is a reflection of 1999. I will say, I do believe these platforms are pretty accurate in terms of the behavior of even Reform Jews who aren't, they're more observant when they come to synagogue. They might not be at all observant at home, or they might not come to synagogue at all, but when they do come, they'll put a kippah on their head, right? And maybe even wear a talis. That's reflective of 1999 platform, that there has been a move towards traditionalism. Yes, Marian.
Just a personal note. I grew up at Temple Israel. And for those people who don't know, I'm 77. Nobody had a bar or bat mitzvah. Not only didn't we learn any Hebrew, but bar and bat mitzvahs were not observed.
And now I spend so much of my time working in the Hebrew school, preparing kids for it. And I find it a very authentic experience, you know, because you have to learn so much and you're doing something real for a lot. But that was one of the things that was gone, besides wearing the talits and the stuff you mentioned.
Yep.
It just didn't happen. We were confirmed when we were 14. And whatever that, you know, on Shavuot, more or less. And that
Yep.
was it.
And that's a perfect way to sort of, you know, so how does this?
But one more thing, the strength of that is many women my age often feel as if they got the short, you know, the fuzzy end of the lollipop. They weren't allowed. They were made lesser. They couldn't do it. Or if they was a bat mitzvah, they only could do it on Friday night. I had none of that because nobody did it, the boys or the girls.
Yep.
So I had none of, you know, on that level, the male-female thing and the equity there was wonderful.
Yeah, for example, Amy, you know, who's in the next room, grew up in conservative, you know, the conservative movement, and she was offered one of the first group of young women offered the opportunity to actually have their bat mitzvah and read from the Torah as opposed to the Haftorah, because it was women had bat mitzvahs, but it was Haftorah, not Torah. So it's a really interesting point. But the bigger thing you're saying to me kind of sums it up in a nice way, which is how do these platforms translate on the ground in real people's lives, right? These are, you know, these are leaders and rabbis and philosophers and theologians. And, you know, we don't have this copy of these platforms in our pocket. But like Marian says, you know, to compare her upbringing Jewishly with now how our kids are, you know, no less progressive, no less liberal, but there's something that's been brought back to them that was absent in the Reform communities of even, you know, 50, 60 years ago. And I think that if you want to look at how these platforms maybe either, you know, you could look at it both ways. Did the platform influence the behavior, or did the behavior kind of create the need for a new platform? Probably both, again, you know, but you know, interesting to see the intellect that goes into what is happening in synagogue life, you know, on the ground. So I'm going to leave it there. I've certainly, that's my last word. Does anyone have a last word they want to share? Anybody at all that wants to put something out there? So it's great to see you. The University Series continues. I think there's some combination of Susan and Jim are doing the last 2 Tuesdays of, I think they're going to do them both together, but I'm not so sure. But they'll also do some Beit Midrash Chevruta kind of part aspects to this. I think this group should be interested to know that we are planning 2 in-person outdoor Friday night services a month starting in June, 2 in June, 2 in July, 2 in August, which there'll be a sign up. There's a maximum number of people. All that will be announced, but I figured you guys are shul goers by and large, so you know you should know that that's kind of happening. So that's really interesting, and we're looking forward to that in terms of what's happening in the CRC universe. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the night, Lila Tov, and a great rest of the week. And I want to look at your faces one more time. And bye-bye. Shalom. Thanks, everybody.
Night, y'all.
Good night.
See you, Kwan. Bye, guys.